29 fantasy series. That is the amount of series I've either started, continued, or read in 2023. I mean, that number is way higher than I expected. So in this video, I want to give you an overview of all the series I dipped my toes in this year and let you know whether you should read them, whether I plan to continue, and whether I DNF'd any of them. And I will go quickly through these because there's just so many series to highlight. First up, I continued with the Ilborn Saga with Age of Sin, which is book 2 in the Ilborn Saga, and I absolutely loved it. I've given both of the first 2 books in the series 5 out of 5 stars, and if you watch my channel, then you know that I love the series so much. Then I started on Dogs of War by Adrian Chakosky. There are 2 books in the series, and I read the first one, and I thought it was alright, but I just found that I struggle with most of Adrian Chakosky's sci-fi, and ultimately I will not be continuing the series. Malazan. Why can I not get into the series? I'm so sad. This year I picked up the series for the 2nd time and I DNF'd it at the exact same location as last time. Deadass Gates, I just cannot seem to be able to get through that book. So Malazan is, for now, a temporary DNF, but I'm still hoping to maybe next year give it another shot. We'll have to see. Gunmetal Gods by Samil Akhtar, also one of the very few series I DNF'd this year. Now this book is actually brilliantly written, and the world building is absolutely fascinating because it's like Middle Eastern inspired and it's grimdark. It is absolutely brutal, but I just found it to be a tad bit too brutal for my taste. But yeah, if you're looking for a series that is steampunk, grimdark, and Middle Eastern inspired, then Gunmetal Gods is a series for you. The Gale Song by Shauna Lawless. I read the first book, The Children of Gods and Fighting Men, and it is a very well written book, but I just think the setting just wasn't for me. It's a historical fantasy, and there's a big focus on folklore and stuff. It's absolutely fascinating, and my wife loves the series. If you think that sounds fascinating, then definitely give it a go. For now, I am unsure if I'll continue the series. The Order of the Dragon by Mitchell Faywood. I think the first book is called A Gamble with Gods. It's a solid debut novel which blends fantasy and sci-fi together, but ultimately I didn't connect with the characters. I'll probably won't continue with the series. Sealed Empire by Norbert Sivicic. I think that's how you pronounce his name. One of the biggest surprises of this year. The world building is absolutely insane because it feels like your typical traditional kind of fantasy setting, but then there are some crazy sci-fi elements blended into the world, and I just found the plot to be absolutely riveting. Now there's only 1 book in the series so far, but I will definitely be continuing when the next book comes out. Albeit if you read this book, then you know the ending is crazy, and it's so crazy that I'm not sure if I'll enjoy the 2nd book, but we'll have to see. The Library Trilogy by Mark Lawrence. The only book in the series so far is The Book That Wouldn't Burn, and this was one of the biggest disappointments for me this year because almost everyone raves about how incredible this book is. And yes, Mark Lawrence's prose is beautiful and the concept is fascinating. I mean, when you hear about a fantasy series that takes place in a endless library, then that sounds like a dream come true, at least for someone like me. But ultimately, I just didn't connect with the characters, and the plot, and especially in the later half of the book, just became way too crazy, like you were jumping between worlds, and it just ultimately didn't work for me. Mark Lawrence, why can I not seem to get into your books? I think this is the 3rd or 4th book I read by Mark Lawrence, and all of them have been 3 stars. The Tawnyman Trilogy by Robin Hobb. I read the whole series this year, and I absolutely loved it. Now this series is very slow, and I also think that it's probably the worst I read in the realm of the Elderlings. I'll probably rate Life Ship Traders Trilogy first, then Farseer, and then the Tawnyman Trilogy. But still, this was an absolutely amazing series. We really get to explore Fitz even more, and Fitz is to this date one of the best characters I've come across in fantasy. The writing style is beautiful, and as always, I feel so sad for Fitz. But yeah, next year I'm planning on continuing the series with the Dragon Keepers series. But yeah, please more people, read the Realm of the Elderlings, it's so good. The Greenburn Saga, I read the whole trilogy last year, but I did read The Jade Setters of Janloon, which is a prequel novella, and is one of the best novellas I've ever read. It is just so good. Now, I would still say that you will benefit from reading the first trilogy first before reading this one, even though it is a prequel, just because one of my favorite characters from the series actually shows up in this prequel novella, and I think that that will just hit different if you read the whole trilogy first. But you could arguably start with The Jade Setters of Janloon. I read that novella in 1 sitting. I was absolutely immersed and I loved it. So yeah, if you haven't read that one yet, definitely pick it up. The Breadth and Depth Duology by Francisca Liliana. The first book is called Eyeless Ridge, the 2nd book hasn't come out yet. Now this was a very ambitious debut. I mean, the world building is epic in scale. There's so many different moving parts. We have great animal companions, and overall I think this is a very solid debut. Now I think my assessment from having read the first book was that Francisca Liliana would probably have benefited from toning down the world building and the scale of the plot a bit, because it felt like it was maybe a tiny bit too ambitious for a debut author, if that makes any sense. But still, there are so many things that I loved about this book, and there's definitely a way for book 2 to become an incredible book, because yeah, there's so many exciting things put in place in the first book. The Comic Codes by Alexander Darwin. Now this was a huge huge surprise for me. Now, I haven't continued the series yet, but I picked up the combat codes because I was just looking for a palate cleanser, and I loved this book so much, and I really need to continue with this series. Basically set in a world where most of our conflicts are not resolved with wars, but are resolved in duels. It is very fascinating, and I just found the plot to be so well paced. There's so much intrigue, we have a great underdog, we have a great meta. So yeah, this was a huge surprise for me. Now, is this book the next Game of Thrones? No, but it is just such a great time, so I would definitely recommend the combat codes. Talon Sister by Jen Williams. Now, this is a duology. I'm actually not sure what the series is called, and it's now been 4 months or 3 months since I read this series, and the more I've thought about it, the more disappointed I've become with it. Now, initially I think I gave it 3 stars, but yeah, this is just one of those series where I just didn't feel like the characters were that memorable. I felt that the plot was just way too slow paced. I mean, it was so slow paced that when I finally got to the last act, I just didn't really care about the plot anymore, which is really unfortunate, because similar to the Winning Flame trilogy, which is one of my favorite series, the world building is insane. It is extremely weird in typical Williams fashion, but the characters and the plot just wasn't as interesting, which makes me so sad, because I love the Winning Flame trilogy, and I met Jen Williams in real life, and she's a lovely person. Now, I will probably read the second book when it comes out, but I don't know when I will get to that book. The Books of Babel by Josiah Bancroft. This is a quartet. I read all 4 books this year, and I made a rant video about the last book, because that is arguably one of the worst books I've ever read in my life. Now, I don't understand why people rate that book so highly. I know it's very contentious. People either hate or love it, and I typically love fantasy books that are weird, but this book just, oh no, don't get me started. If you want to hear my full thoughts about the series, I made a full video. What I will say is that Bancroft's prose is incredible, his imagination and world building is on another level, and this is one of the most unique series I've ever read. But every single book in this series has elements that just frustrates me to no end, and the 4th book is, in my opinion, it's so disappointing, it's so bad that I struggle recommending this whole quartet now, even though the first 2 books are brilliant and the 3rd one is okay. But yeah, the last act is just, it just destroyed how I view the series. So yeah, it's very disappointing. Definitely one of the biggest disappointments of the year. The Dandelion Dynasty by Ken Liu. Now, I read the first 3 books in this quartet, and I'm hoping to get to Speaking Bones this year, but we will see, because all of these books are just massive and take a lot of concentration because they are dense, but this will probably go down as the favorite series I've started or read this year. Incredible, absolutely incredible, and I just can't recommend it enough. I mean, the characters are incredible, but the world building, I just can't even explain how insane the world building is. And The Wall of Storms book 2 is probably gonna be my favorite book of the year, at least in my top 3 for sure. Absolute masterpiece, and I really feel like this series is challenging fantasy's new ways. It's bringing something really new and exciting to the genre. So yeah, if you haven't picked up the Dandelion Dynasty yet, I would highly recommend it. It's not a series I think you should pick up if you're very new to the genre, because it's just so different and dense. But yeah, if you have read a bit of fantasy and you're looking for something new, pick up the Dandelion Dynasty. Red Rising by Pierce Brown. I read the original trilogy this year, and overall, I had a great time. But for me, when I picked up the series, I expected it to become one of my all-time favorite series. I expected maybe to give every single book in the series 5 out of 5 stars, which just didn't happen. And I think my expectations were just a bit too high, because it's one of those weird things now that I gave book 2, which was my favorite book, 4.5 stars. I gave book 3, I think 4 stars, but the first book I gave like 3 stars. So none of the books were 5 out of 5 stars for me. And since I expected to give all the books, or at least 2 of them, 5 out of 5 stars, and that just didn't happen, it kind of feels like a letdown. So it's weird how the human mind works, but overall, I had a great time, and I'll definitely be continuing this series. Now, did Red Rising change my life? No. Would I recommend it? Yes, I would still recommend it. I had a great time, and it was very exciting to read. Fourth Wing, or the Empyrean series. Hated Fourth Wing, would not recommend it, not for me. Now, I also continue with the Cosmere. I read Emperor's Soul, I read Trust in the Emerald Sea, I read Secret History. I think I probably also read some of the other books. But yeah, Cosmere, brilliant. And overall, the books I read in the Cosmere this year have been great. I really enjoyed them. The Tie Child Trilogy by R.J. Barker. You can see them back here. I read the whole trilogy this year. I actually had to read along with my viewers for this series. Now, I made a full spoiler-free review where I go deep into the series and why I think you should read it. Now, what I will say is I think the learning curve for this series is quite steep, because R.J. Barker, he invents so many new terms and words. So the first 100 pages, you kind of feel lost because everything just feels so different and you're not exactly sure what's happening. But yeah, R.J. Barker's world building is, again, one of the most unique worlds I've come across ever in fantasy. And I think the plot was also very, very interesting. I really enjoyed it. I really enjoyed R.J. Barker's writing style, but it's very much a series I can imagine a lot of people have DNF'd, especially in the first book, because yeah, everything just feels very, very strange. But I would highly recommend it, and I'm very glad I read it. The Pillars of Peace by Tom Dumbrell. Now, this is a prequel novella that came out this year. You can see how short it is, so I had to include it. It's only like 60 pages and there's not that much text on it. But yeah, this was a great entry to the world of Tom Dumbrell. If you haven't read anything about Tom Dumbrell, you can start with this one, but I would still say that The Look of King, the first book, is probably a better starting point. But for now, I think that this series is concluded with 3 books and a prequel novella. But yeah, I read this in one sitting and I had a decent time with it. The Smokesmiths by I never know how to pronounce his first name, Silva. Now, I read Seas of War and Ruins of Smoke, which is the prequel novella this year, and I think the second book is coming out early next year, I think. But yeah, I had a wonderful time with this one. The magic system is based on smoke, which I found very interesting, and Silva, he does not mess around. He takes some massive risks in this series, and the plot twists are very, very satisfying in my opinion, and the pacing is spot on. I had a great time with both the books I read this year. Now again, it's not the next Tolkien kind of world building or plot or anything, but if you're looking for a very solid fantasy series that has unique world building, a intricate magic system, and great characters and great pacing, and is also very underrated, then check out The Smokesmiths. I'll definitely be continuing this series next year. The Bound and the Broken by Ryan Cahill. I read The Ice this year, which is the latest entry. I absolutely love that one. I love actually the novellas a bit more, I think, than the full-length novels. But yeah, this series is just brilliant. You've heard me talk about it so often, so I'm not gonna keep on going about it. Then I started The Echo Saga by Philip C. Quaintrell. I read the first 2 books in the original trilogy, and I'm hoping to read the 3rd book this year, so I can have read at least the first trilogy. Now, there are a total of 9 books in this series, and Quaintrell has just started a new series that takes place in the same world, but like 5,000 or 10,000 years in the past. So there's just so much to dive into. But yeah, if you're a fan of John Gwynne, Ryan Cahill, that traditional fantasy that also feels modern and has like great pacing and so on, then this series is definitely for you, and the covers are absolutely gorgeous. And The Rise of the Ranger, the first book, was good, but Empire of Third book 2 was a massive step up in my opinion, and I'm very excited to continue the series. David Bat is how you pronounce it, by S.A. Chakraborty. Now, we read City of Brass for the Viking book club together. Is one of my patrons, Mel's choice. She put the book forward and was chosen, and I'm glad I read City of Brass, because now I kind of understand why people love the series so much. But ultimately, I don't think I'm going to continue this series. For me, there was just a bit too much romance in this plot, which it's just a personal preference. The world building was absolutely interesting because it's Middle Eastern inspired, but I just felt like the plot was very focused on a very small area. Now, at the end of book 1, you kind of feel like the plot is gonna explode in book 2 and 3, which kind of made me intrigued. But yeah, I think overall I just didn't connect enough with the stories to justify continuing, because as you see here, I have so many series I'm currently reading. But yeah, if you're looking for something different, if you don't mind a bit of romance in your series, then this is the series for you. Powder Mage Trilogy by Brian McClellan. Now, I only read the first book, Promise of Blood, this year, quite recently, and I love that book. It's probably gonna be one of my favorite books of the year. I think I'm gonna give it probably 4.5 stars out of 5. Absolutely brilliant. It reminded me of Age of Madness by Joe Abercrombie, which is one of my favorite series of all time. Now, Age of Madness is better, but there's definitely some similarities. Like, we have grimdark elements, we have steampunk elements, but what I really enjoyed with the Powder Mage trilogy is that the supernatural elements are, or the fantastical ones, are heightened a bit more, and there's so many different moving parts in this story, so I'm going to continue with this series before the year ends. I simply can't wait. I absolutely loved it. The Dance of Light by Gregory Contaxis. Now, I read the first prequel novella, which is around 100 pages, and overall, I had a great time with it. My only real criticism with the novella was that I felt like the ending was quite rushed. Like, we have really brilliant character development in the first 40-50 pages, but the second half, everything just felt like it happened too quickly. So yeah, I think if that novella was maybe 150 pages, then I wouldn't have any complaints about it. But yeah, it's a very exciting entry into a new series, which I believe Contaxis plans to be a 5-book fantasy series. So yeah, he's definitely very ambitious, and I'm hoping to read the first book in the series, The Return of the Night, I think it's called, sometimes next year, but we'll see what happens. The Way of Edan by Philip Chase. I've only read the first book this year, but I think that this was a very, very impressive debut. I'm quite blown away how beautiful Philip Chase's prose is, especially considering that this is a debut novel. It's absolutely insane. Now, this is very much traditional fantasy at its core, but it's done very well, and I wouldn't be surprised if book 2 and 3 will feel more original, if that makes any sense. But yeah, it's one of my priority series to continue next year. Then I read Bookshops and Bone Dust by Travis Baldry, which is the prequel novella to the Legends and latte. I'm not sure if it's a series because both of them are kind of standalones, but they also are kind of the same series. But yeah, love the series. It's cute, it's cozy, but it's nothing mind-blowing, you know. Oh, I also have to mention I also read Kings of the Wild. I think the series is called The Band. I didn't enjoy Kings of the Wild at all, which I didn't expect to either. We read that one for the Viking book club, and before picking it up, I didn't expect to enjoy it because I've heard there's so much humor, and when I read it, I didn't enjoy it, so no surprise there. Oh, I almost forgot. Memory, Sorrow and Thorn, The Dragonbone Chair. I read this book last week, I finished it, and one of my favorites of the year. I really want to continue the series this year. Williams is a genius. The prose is incredible. The characterization is just on another level. It's been a while since I felt so immersed in a fantasy story. So yeah, Memory, Sorrow and Thorn. I've only read the first book, but that's also already now one of my favorite series I read this year. And I just remembered that there are actually some series that I haven't mentioned. So I also read the first 2 books in the Children of Time trilogy this year. Loved the first book, didn't really enjoy the second book. And then I finally started Oathbringer. I don't have a physical copy, but books are in the store of my archive. I've literally only scratched the surface, but oh, it's so good. And then I also have an arc for the Empire of the Wolf trilogy, The Trials of an Empire. I'm halfway through that 3rd book, and it is absolutely brilliant. So those are all the series I've dipped my toes in 2023, and actually the real number is 31. I think I said 29 at the beginning of this video. So which series do you think I should prioritize for next year? And what has been your favorite series of the year? Definitely let me know your thoughts in the comments down below, and thank you so much for watching. Thank you so much for watching to the end of this video. Now, if you want to support what I do here, then I do have a Patreon. Now, a reason why I created a Patreon was to find a new way to reinvest to the channel, because basically since I created my Patreon, I spent around 100% of my earnings to hire an editor to do a couple of videos for me a month. Now, since creating my Patreon, an editor has done more than 20 videos for me on my channel, so it makes a huge difference. Now, if you join my Patreon, you will also get some benefits. For example, you'll get a name in my videos like these guys. You'll also be able to join the exclusive Viking book club where every month we read one book together, and you might be the one to put the book forward. This month we're reading this book, and next month we're reading this book. You also get to vote on my next read, get access to exclusive videos like a wrap-up or even book reviews, and so much more. But this is totally voluntary, but all support is much appreciated.